My name is Bert, and this is the Still Life Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Still Life Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Bert. I am not dead. I am alive. About a month ago, I contracted COVID. Actually, it was about 6 weeks ago. Felt like I got hit by a freight train for about 4 days. Like a really, really bad flu. Aches and pains. Was running a temperature somewhere between 99 and 100.6. After day 4, started feeling better. Was dealing with a lot of exhaustion. And here I am now, 4 weeks removed from recovery. And the one big lingering problem is that I had completely lost my voice, but have had this kind of raspy hoarseness now for a couple of weeks. My sense of taste and smell are at about 75%, so they are improving, albeit not as quickly as I would like, but things are getting better. I'm fortunate to have had a fairly non-eventful, illness with COVID. There's obviously people who've had it a lot worse and have died from COVID. In fact, a coworker that I worked with went on a ventilator within about 5 days and then passed away about 3 weeks ago. And we contracted it at the same time. And we're about the same age and very, very different outcomes. So it's really odd the way that this affects everybody so differently. I've been thinking a lot about this, but it's really mind-boggling because a lot of viruses, as we know it, tend to have a specific set of symptoms. And with COVID, there's all these different symptoms, and there's no kind of rhyme or reason to how they affect other people. Now, people who are immunocompromised or have all these underlying conditions, they are severely complicated and magnified with COVID, but it's really kind of bizarre to me. So, and I'm going to do my best to not get political about it. I do believe that COVID has been weaponized politically, and I don't want to say weaponized to use against us, but it's become a political weapon. Regardless of where you stand politically, COVID is being used in this political back and forth warfare. And it's really just ridiculous. I have my issues with the pharmaceutical industry and, the fact that a lot of politicians are bought and paid for by, special interest groups. And, there's a lot of things that I see that are wrong with the way, not just COVID, but a lot of things are done in the upper echelon of our government. That's a problem. But that's another conversation for another day. I really just wanted to get back on here and get some talking in, even though my voice, like I said, isn't back to normal. I wanted to start putting content back out there and really start prioritizing the podcast again. As my voice continues to get better and as I get closer to being completely recovered from this voice issue, whatever it is, I will start looking at bringing on guests once again. One of the things I do want to bring up, it is Suicide Awareness Month. If you go back through one of my previous episodes, I want to say it was episode 14, maybe. I don't remember for sure. But I talk about depression and suicide, PTSD, a lot of things that I've dealt with over my life. And, if you're feeling, thoughts of depression or feeling suicidal or having suicidal ideations, please reach out, to anybody, a friend, a coworker. Just reach out to somebody It's so important. Nothing changes if we don't make the effort to change. And so, that's a big deal, because even if we need help, a lot of times as people that get depressed or are suicidal, they act like they're completely normal and they hide it. And you can't do that. If you're feeling depressed, if you're having these suicidal thoughts or tendencies or thinking about ending your life, ask for help. Tell someone what's going on in your head. Like I said, friend, family, whoever. Most people are not going to be angry or upset with you. It'll be quite the opposite. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for confiding in me. Thank you for asking for help. If you don't feel comfortable speaking with a friend or a family member, there's of course, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. Again, that's 800-273-8255. For those of you that haven't struggled with those things, I don't know anyone who hasn't been affected in some way by suicide, whether it's a friend or a family member, an acquaintance, or someone you knew through a friend or family member. Everyone has been impacted by suicide in some way. And so, we're starting to finally address this and get better at speaking out, speaking up, and encouraging people to do so. And if even you don't feel comfortable calling the Suicide Lifeline, email me, thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. That's thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. Reach out to me. I can help get you connected with resources, or just listen. Because a lot of times that's what we need, is we've got all this pent-up frustration and, depression, anger, anxiety. All these emotions are bottled up inside, and sometimes we just need a release to step back from that ledge. Suicide isn't a one-dimensional thing. It doesn't affect just one person, and, it doesn't just manifest itself in one certain way. There are so many ways that it manifests itself, and there are so many other people that it affects outside of the person who is suicidal or has taken their own life. And, it's having been on both sides as someone who struggled with, thoughts of suicide and again, the anxiety and depression. It's never a one-dimensional thing. It never really boils down to one thing. It's, just the fact that I've overwhelmed myself mentally and emotionally. I feel like I've let people down, whether it's friends, family, my children, whatever the case may be, myself even. I feel like a failure, something I really wanted, I worked really hard for, didn't come to fruition, and I feel like I failed myself and I failed those people around me. And, a lot of times we put tremendous pressure on ourselves to live up to this ideas that we think exist in other people's heads, but really only exist in our own. And so it's a constant struggle to say, you know what, I screwed up, but it's okay, and it will be okay. We really need to do a better job at embracing failure. And one of the biggest examples of that is Gary Vaynerchuk, who I followed on social media. I enjoy listening to him. Incredibly foul-mouthed entrepreneur. He works his tail off, and this guy has easily failed more than he's succeeded. But what comes from failure is learning. You're going to learn way more in life by failing than you ever will by succeeding. If you succeed at things, you really don't need to continue growing or learning because you've won. It's only through failure and loss that we learn and reevaluate things and can have a fresh take or fresh approach to, whatever it is that we are trying to accomplish. And the crazy thing is this rings true in all aspects of life, in really any venue of life. Whether you're a professional athlete, I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan, being a Kansas City native. We lost to the Baltimore Ravens last night in less than spectacular fashion. The game came down to the wire, and, we went to run the ball. We were down by a point, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire had a fumble. The Ravens got the ball, ran the clock out, and that was the game. Disappointing as a Chiefs fan to lose. You always hate to lose, But through that loss, and through that loss in the second game of the season, they can go back and reevaluate what they did well, but also where they underperformed. They underperformed in stopping the run against the Ravens. Lamar Jackson is an incredible athlete when it comes to running with the football. As a running quarterback, he reminds me of a young Michael Vick. While he may have a very limited career as a very physical running quarterback, right now it's serving him and the Ravens quite well. And so, they ran the ball all over us last night, and we've got to figure out how to close those holes and how to utilize our defensive line more efficiently to prevent that kind of a thing in the future. And it wasn't just Lamar Jackson. The Ravens running backs they were getting yardage pretty much at will, which was very frustrating. Fortunately for us, we have a phenomenal secondary and really held the pass game to a minimum. But again, the Ravens really aren't a passing offense. They are a running offense, led by a running quarterback. Now, all it's going to take to change that for the Ravens is Lamar Jackson taking one good hit. And he's going to have to reevaluate. The Ravens are going to have to reevaluate how they're playing the game of football. But for now, it's serving them well. They're walking through defenses and getting yardage as they please. Now, again, being a Chiefs fan, the loss hurt. It hurt a lot. It sucked. But on the flip side of that, we can go back, look at footage. Hey, let's improve. Let's grow. Let's continue to work. Had we won last night, the look and review of the tape would not been as in depth. Well, we did enough to win the game. We got behind a little bit. We need to kind of tighten things up. Well, a loss, it's we have to do this and we have to do this now. Now, the one benefit on, the football field and in most genres of sport is that when you take your losses early in the season, you tend to have more room for growth, obviously. The further into the season you get, the less you can recover from the losses. So this rings true in many facets of the sport, or of sports in general. Now, where it's a little different is, your combative sports, combat sports, mixed martial arts, boxing, Muay Thai, kickboxing, things of that nature. Because if you take a loss, you may have done everything right, but one-on-one, your opponent was just better that day. Now, you can go back to the drawing board and continue to perfect techniques, learn new things, tighten up your game, but in a one-on-one scenario, at the end of the day, it all rests on you. Whereas with a team sport, it's not one-dimensional, it's not one-sided, it is a team thing. There's 22 guys, 11 on offense, 11 on defense. One of those guys having a bad day probably won't lead to a complete failure in a game. However, one person having a bad day can certainly affect the rest of the team. So, again, there's the big difference between, the solo combat sports venue or, golf or things of that nature versus a team sport, soccer, football, baseball, so on and so forth. So, the biggest takeaway as I wrap this up and kind of tie all this together, is that embrace failure, learn from it, grow from it. Don't bind yourself to your failures. You are not your failure. What happens after your failure is the result of your response to it. Use it to learn, use it to grow, use it to come back smarter and stronger the next time. And with that, I'd like to thank you for joining me today on the Still Life Podcast. As always, for questions, comments, topic ideas, suggestions, or to become a sponsor of the Still Life Podcast, you can reach us, thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. That's the Still Life Podcast @gmail.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at the Still Life Podcast, and Twitter at the Still Life Pod. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Still Life Podcast. Thanks again for joining me today on the Still Life Podcast. We'll talk again soon.